Moriden Athluan.
The champion of Kinneret. Moriden showed the beauty of nature by finding renewal for the great and glorious Gildergreen of Whiterun, providing a place of worship for all manner of men and mer.
The champion of Daibella, the only man to enter the most sacred places of the temple in Markat and live. He, who found out the Daibellian symbol and returned her to the temple, so that all could hear the will of the great goddess.
The messenger of Mara, whose small words and influence sparked two of the greatest love stories of all time in Skyrim.
Moriden was at the height of his goodly deeds when word reached him of a new threat to Skyrim and its people.
Like the mighty champion of the people he had become, he looked up to the role of the people's champion once again and set off to destroy the vampire threat.
Come closer and hear the story of how he destroyed one of the oldest threats to
Still
man
searching
and
for stories about me, I see. I hate to disappoint you, but this portion of my story, you won't find a single bard who knows what he's talking about. That's fine now. We have time, my friend. I can tell it far better than they can, as they tell it for entertainment, not because it is truth. Because the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. "25 Sons Dusk, 4th Era, 201. Darkfall Cave is located in the Northern Reach. Such, I have said before, as remote as that portion of the hold is, the cave is in the most remote portion of the region, meaning that if there is a place in the Reach that would never see sunlight, it would be this place. The cave entrance was not really remarkable, nor were the first 200 or so yards of stone walls and spiders. Then, coming down a small incline, I saw the first indications that all was not as I expected. The ruins that I saw on the far side were Snow Elf, the mer that eventually became the former. That, however, I had seen before. The bridge that spanned the depths between me and those ruins, however, that was as poorly made and rickety as I've ever seen. I'm certain that to try crossing it would be folly. But as there is no other way forward, and the scrolls have made it plain that this is where I need to go, it would seem that I am supposed to trust in fate and destiny. I hate trusting in fate and destiny. I dislike the idea that I am not at the helm of my own life. Existential crisis aside, I had no other options, and so began the crossing slowly. I was surprised when I reached the far side without the bridge collapsing. I was even more surprised when I realized that the bridge led nowhere. No further cave, no switches, no hidden doors, just a massive sinkhole with water rushing through it, heading at high speeds even further, into the cave. No. Surely not. I mean, yes, the name of the cave is Darkfall, but surely that isn't what is required to move further in. A plunge through inky blackness into water whose depth I could not even guess, to be carried along who knew how far? On the other hand, if you want to hide something of value or import, it would be one oblivion of a way to hide it. Anyone clinging to their sanity would look at this and give a fervent no. Since, however, I was already dead, in a way, what had I to lose? I moved out to the center of the bridge and stepped off. A few moments later, after falling through air a second time, a terrifying second in which I saw spiders even bigger than the ones I have seen previously, I was dumped rather unceremoniously in another large cave, lit only by the faint blue glow of mushrooms. It wasn't Blackreach, but for all I knew, it led there. We are not the first to have gotten this far. That much is now certain. We ran across the camp of a Breton not long after we started through the heavily spider-infested cave we had been dumped in. How he died, I can't be certain, but he's not been here overly long. Indeed, he might even have been a scout for the Dawn Guard, but there's no way to be certain. Just because he isn't wearing their armor or their weapons doesn't mean he isn't a part of them, and I prefer that idea than that they might have been a thrall for the Volkihar. The path running by the camp ran up and down slope both. As I hoped, the upslope ended in a hidden door that led back out into the cave, so at least I know my route of retreat, should I need it. As for down, well, there was only one way to find out. Instead of spiders, we began to encounter trolls, and if the Dawn Guard knew of this cave, they'd be able to capture and train their attack trolls for decades on the numbers we saw down there. What I did not expect was to see another mer alive down here. And yet, as I came around a corner, that was unquestionably what I saw in the distance. Was this who had killed the Breton earlier? A god of some kind who was here to protect Auri-El's bow? Or was there something else going on? Prudence said I should put an arrow in the other person from as far away as possible. The voice of caution said that talking might be the better route. Even Serana seemed to think that, perhaps, combat was not the correct resolution here. So, though I felt it would end in blood, I put away my bow and approached as loudly and obviously as I could to announce our presence and willingness to talk. It was well that I held my hand, and what I have learned defies all reason, and everything I've ever learned about the Snow Elves. First off, there is the fact that there are at least 2 of them still alive. The first is the mer I saw in the distance and who explained the situation to me. A mer calling himself Gelabor, a paladin of Auri-El. He knew what we were looking for, of course. It's all anyone who has ever made it this far has been seeking. Before he will reveal its location, however, he had a task for us to complete, and it regards the second of the Snow Elves who still lives, his brother, Vurther. Gelabor believes his brother to have been somehow corrupted by the Falmer, the betrayed, as he calls them. His death, it seems, is called for. In short, I have to kill a mer who has lived for thousands of years to obtain a bow that has been lost for at least as long. I've done worse for less, I suppose. This cave, Darkfall, it is the beginning of an old snow elf trail, followed by initiates to the worshippers of Auri-El. Each one would begin here, in darkness, before using a way shrine to travel to the main event, so to speak, a pilgrimage through 5 shrines, learning the mantras and meditating on their meanings, before eventually arriving at the main worship site, where they would meet with the Archcurate and begin their life of service and worship. And it is there that his brother hides. Gelabor activated the first of the shrines, as he explained, and I have to admit that the building, or shrine, or whatever it is you want to call it, is beautiful in the exact way that Dwemer-built items are functional. One would likely complement the other if they had truly worked together when the Snow Elves sought refuge from the ancient Nords. But then, if they had, Gelabor likely wouldn't be calling them the Betrayed, either. After explaining the entire pilgrimage process and how it would work, Serana didn't seem overly impressed by either Gelabor himself nor the things we were being required to do. She maintained that it was all a waste of time. He argued that much of it was symbolic and that she couldn't possibly understand any of it anyway. I stayed out of that argument. I knew as much as I needed to. I needed the bow. Vertha needs to die for me to get it. Simple enough. Anything else involved now was just a means to that end. So with all of that resolved, I stepped into the Way Shrine. The cave we emerged into was lengthy and filled with, naturally, the Falmer. Each turn seemed to show me more of them, along with the Chorus pets in multiple stages of their own life cycle. The sounds of water, dripping, rushing, or trickling, were constant companions. The caves seemed to lead in a general upward direction, so wherever we were transported, it is likely as deep beneath the surface as where we had begun. After hours of careful travel, we opened a secret door, and another massive cave was revealed. But this one had an obvious goal: to reach the brightly lit Ray Shrine on the far end. Between us and it was darkness. Though it appeared close, I had the feeling that it was further away than it would seem. Though the path was every bit as twisting as I was expecting, the path was not treacherous, nor filled with traps. It was simply winding and long. I imagine that when the Snow Elves walked this path there was something symbolic in this, likely something about how wandering around in the dark, even if you think you know your destination, can make the path even longer than it needs to be, with many false ends, wrong turns, and the like. It may even have a shred of truth to it. In due time, however, we reached the Way Shrine where, as we had been told would be the case, the long-dead spirit of the shrine's keeper waited for us. Believing we were initiates who had spent some time studying here, he welcomed us to the Way Shrine of Illumination, and, after filling the ceremonial ewer with the ceremonial water, allowed us to enter the Way Shrine and continue our journey. When we emerged, we both of us knew that we had emerged into open sky somewhere, and though dim, the sun still shone on the day. It was more painful this time, feeling the sun's effects, though I could not say for certain why. It took us some time to climb to the top of the sinkhole that we had emerged into, but when we did, it was clear we were no longer in Skyrim, nor any part of it either of us had ever seen. This was a true, untamed wilderness, a valley full of predators and prey, life and death. Which we were, and which we would experience, was yet to be seen, though with the sun nearing the horizon I knew which we would be in just a short time. A day or two ago that thought would have been filled with smugness and confidence. Now I'm not sure. The price that goes with this power is not what I had bargained for. I put those thoughts behind me again and concentrated on the next steps. This valley, this forgotten vale, this is what I needed to concentrate on. The here and now, where it belonged. What I would do later would wait until then. We began walking along the bottom of the valley. The predators here are different than those I am used to seeing in Skyrim, though more in coloration and habit than in form. The large cat, for example, is dark in color and stalks for a longer time before it strikes. It dies the same way a saber cat does, however. With no clear indication of direction, we tried the first cave we came to. Though it did not contain the way shrine we sought, it did have something very rare indeed, so much so that I wasn't sure at first that I had indeed found one. Shell bugs are rare finds, and their shells are highly sought after for armoring and the like. Enough prized that I felt no hesitation in killing the creature and harvesting its shell. That, however, was the extent of the cave's contents, so we left and resumed our search in the valley. We found a path that seemed like it had once, in the past, been well tended. It curved gradually as it climbed the valley walls, but we also saw many less tended paths that led off from it. One such seemed to be more trodden than the others, though not recently, and taking that as a cue, we left the main path to walk the other. The fog and the falling night made it more difficult, but not so hard as it might have been in Skyrim. The plants here, many of them like those in the caves we have been walking recently, create their own light. They were bright enough that we were able to use them as a guide, and as a result it was not long later that we found the second way shrine. The way shrine of sight, according to its spectral keeper. Apparently, the Snow Elves' beliefs include the idea that while the main path might get you where you want to go, sometimes leaving the main path will allow you to see things from a new perspective. This shrine was dedicated to this ideal, not to avoid the main path altogether, but to use it to get yourself closer to the places others have yet to go. An interesting idea, and one I shall ponder on. Just because it comes from a long-dead religion doesn't mean it might not have worth. 26 Suns Dusk, 4th Era, 201. We exited the first valley only to find that we were entering a far larger one. Though I could see off to the south the next way shrine, I instead turned north and looked for higher ground, wanted to get an idea of the lay of the land. The first thing I should note is that wherever this valley is, it is at least as far north as Skyrim itself, possibly further. The valley is separated into two sections from what I can see, a lower river valley and an upper frozen lake. I dropped from the height I was looking from into the river valley and followed it north. Like the one we had just left, there were valley predators here. Like the frost giant I ran into in a small cave near the waterfall that fed the river. The giant would be of little mention, save that it had in its possession a strangely shaped gem. Sapphire, I believe. I was unsure what to make of it, but it was unusual enough to catch my attention. On the far side of the river I received a partial answer about the gem. A platform with an odd receptacle, just the size and shape of the gem I had pulled from the giant's carcass, was on the shores. I tried the gem and it was, in fact, a perfect fit. Then a small grate closed over it, and the half-broken doorway next to it flared to life. Another portal. Snow Elves loved their portals, it seems. Taking a deep breath, I touched the plane of energy and was whisked away. I don't know where the other end of the portal was, but I know what I found there. Treasures. Gems. Armors. Things of material worth, assuming I get out of here alive. Well, so to speak, of course. If there are other gems like this in the valley, they may well be worth the time and effort to backtrack here and open other gates. This place has been sealed off from the rest of the world for times far longer than even most elves live, Gelabor being the obvious exception. The value of such things, both to collectors and the museum, is almost incalculable. After returning through the portal, I continued to follow the river back the way I had originally come from. Another frost giant was in a cave at the bottom of the second falls, and it also had one of the strange gems, this one of amethyst. I did not immediately backtrack to open the next portal, figuring that there would be several more yet to find, possibly. Hopefully not all of them would be in frost giant hands, but so far, that trend seems to be holding. Finally, near the bottom of the valley, the third shrine that I had seen earlier was upon me. The Shrine of Learning, it is called, and I repeated my required actions here. Learning, it was taught, is not a destination, but a journey. Though there are things that we seek specifically, once those things are learned, they only spur us towards the next destination, and thus, over time, you journey from the darkness of ignorance into the enlightenment of knowledge. Pretty words, I'll admit. In a way, I begin to regret the loss of the snow elves and their thinking. So far, it's a far sight better than the Nord mantra of bash, kill, eat that seems to have driven them for the last several thousand years. After making certain I had looked in every possible place in the lower valley, and finding a few chests full of nice little trinkets, we continued along the obvious and intended path of the initiates. It was a steep climb, but we emerged onto what anywhere else might be thought of as an unusually flat plain covered in snow. I knew, however, that it was a long frozen lake, and that, mostly, from the obvious frozen waterfalls that could be seen from the lower valley. I was hesitant to step out onto the lake, partially because I wasn't sure there was anything to find out there, partially because the sun had risen and we were now vulnerable, and cold, and hungry. We hadn't exactly brought snacks with us. While the blood potions we did have were enough to keep us moving and sociable, it didn't truly feed the pangs we were starting to feel. Plus, I just have a very bad feeling about that lake. Though the cold cannot kill me, and that I know of, anyhow, neither is it something that I could ignore. We began edging around the lake, sticking close to the frozen shores. I did not relish the idea of breaking through the ice and getting stuck in the freezing waters below us. That became an even bigger concern when the ice shifted suddenly. At first I thought it was just the ice settling, but when it happened again just moments later, accompanied by the screams of 2 dragons, I realized we had much bigger issues. 2 of the beasts shot from the depths, straight through the ice. With 2 of us, we managed to separate them at first, but our daytime vulnerability made things less than easy. In fact, our situation was desperate. I should have known not to make this kind of mistake, but I'd not thought to find a dragon, let alone 2 inside of a cave. The fact that we weren't in a cave anymore is not lost on me, but that was what we thought we would be dealing with when we entered. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I shouted out Dernevir's name, summoning him once more to Mundus. Apart from learning the second word of the Solitaire shout, though that was after the fighting, it came roaring into battle, causing the 2 to be confused and in sudden disarray. Their confusion allowed me to down the first of the dragons, its knowledge entering my mind even as I continued battling the second. With 3 of us now fighting the second, the battle was a short one, though very close run. Dernevir flapped his way across the landscape, enjoying his taste of Mundus. Serana and myself sought shadows, and did the best we could to heal ourselves. I will not lie. We were in bad shape. Dusk was still many, many hours away. We had no shelter, and though we had the ability to make a fire to keep us more or less moving, we had, as I mentioned before, no real way to keep ourselves sustained. It was here that I really began to question just how much power being a vampire really provided me. I was vulnerable to flames, my food choices were severely curtailed, and even if I didn't have to sleep, I was extremely vulnerable for half of the day. Neither of us spoke as we staggered on across the lake. A familiar sensation, however, drew me to a large stone on the edge of the lake, the call of a word wall, though in this case not so much a wall as just a large rock. It still filled the same purpose, however, granting me the second word of the Drain Vitality shout, Magicka. As nice a find as it was, it did nothing to help us recover. And so we staggered on. Right foot. Left foot. Right foot again. The mantra kept me moving forward, despite the cold and the pain. We found the path of the initiates on the far side of the lake and began once again to climb. A short while later, another of the way shrines appeared before us. The way shrine of resolution. I doubt that the dragons were part of the trial the snow elves had envisioned when they set up this rite. They did, however, add to the lesson that was taught on this trek, that what you seek after, if it is something that is worthwhile, will not be easy. Only dedication, perseverance, and a resolve to reach the end of the road, no matter how long or hard, will see you through to the end. I had learned this when I left Windhelm, seeking the life's blood of Ulfric Stormcloak. I had lost it when he died at my hands, and I have been searching for it ever since. Lord Harkon had, I had thought, offered me something to replace it. I was, as I have grown a habit of doing, wrong. This had not been something worth chasing, for I hadn't chased it at all. It had been handed to me. It was only worth what I had paid for it. Nothing. The way shrine now active, we took a few moments to rest in the shade it provided, though it was not enough to allow us to heal. In time, though, we stood back up and continued pressing forward. I had never seen the former in the light of the sun. I was not pleased to have this be the first time, either. Two paths presented themselves, one that ran along the bottom of a river canyon, and another that rose onto the cliffs that line it, crisscrossing back and forth across the canyon over bridges of Falmer design. I had chosen the higher ground, call it an instinct as an archer, and it was not long before I realized how good of a choice it had been. The Falmer were only part of the issue. It was their pets in the valley that I could begin to make out as we traversed the canyon that told me. I could take either of them, normally. Even both at the same time, though if we had taken the lower route, we'd have had to deal with the Choris while being fired upon from the heights. As wounded as we still were, I doubt we would have survived it. On the heights myself, however, I could ignore the pets at the bottom, and remove the Falmer as I got decent shots at them. The key to survival, right now, is foresight. Seeing what lay ahead, and doing what I could to remove those threats before they were close enough to be genuine ones. The night came on, and nothing happened. My strength did not return. My body did not heal. Serana saw my frustration, and then, when she got a good look at me, her eyes went wide. In a few words, I had waited too long to feed. I was blood-starved. My body would not heal, though most of my other powers would remain until I had drunk from the source. And it would not be a quick feed, but a complete drain of the mortal. It explained much. It also was about the worst thing that I could be dealing with at the moment, as the only living things nearby were Falmer, and I wasn't certain I could even drink their blood. And when I got back to Skyrim, it wouldn't be hard to tell what I was. This was going to be extremely problematic. Another point, it seemed to me, in favor of potentially divesting myself of this gift I'd been given. 27 Sans Dusk, 4th Era, 201. Though the canyon, and then into a massive cave made entirely of ice, we pushed forward. Serana, who it appears had been a bit more prepared and not bothered to mention the problem of being blood-starved to me before we left, began to keep her distance from me. Maybe she's thinking that she might be the best source for a meal. Or maybe she's afraid I'll just go mad with hunger. Either way, she's keeping back. I am trying to ignore her and the thirst. There is nothing to be done about the latter, and I would not risk hurting the former. I do consider her a friend, I think. I haven't really had one of those before, so I can only guess that's our relationship. The cave continued in a steep, upward ascent, with key places in the path either trapped or guarded by Falmer. Desperate to heal, I finally allowed one of the Falmer close enough that I could make the attempt to feed. It didn't go well. Their blood tasted like the 100-year-old remnants of what might have been the greatest meal ever, but now so foul and revolting that it is more likely to hurt than to heal. So I just drained him of his essence instead. The difference is a subtle one, like how you might take the smallest of sips to try to fool your body into thinking it is eaten. It never works, of course, but you keep trying it anyhow. At least, in this case, it was able to heal my body somewhat, so though I am still in a bad situation, it's not as bad as it was earlier. We emerged from the glacial cave and began moving carefully forward through yet another Falmer village. Well, that and the 4th ice giant we've encountered. I now have 4 of these strange gems, having picked up one that appears to be amethyst and another of diamond. I've begun to be very curious about just how many there are, but that is something that will have to wait. Through the Falmer village and then up another steeply inclined tunnel where, surprisingly, there were not many Falmer at all. Perhaps we'd killed them all on our ascent by this point. There was a rockfall near the top, but it was so easy to spot that we were never in any danger when the rocks went rolling by us. Finally, we emerged into the sunlight again to find the final way shrine, the way shrine of radiance before us. This one, I think, had nothing to do with teaching, not the way the other 3 did. I believe this is meant more to call to mind how grateful one can be when one has been kept out of the light for long enough, and then finally emerges into the open sky once again. The canyon, the glacial cave, and the narrow confines of the canyon that used to be Falmer infested, all of them allowed hints of the sun to be seen, but not its full effect. Metaphorically, were I a snow elf from that era, I'd be about as fully enlightened by the leader of their belief system at the inner sanctum, in other words, about to bask in his or her radiance. Perhaps that is the imagery that is meant to be known here. All I know is I want to be done with this mess. Get back to Skyrim and find a bandit to munch on. I have seen pieces of their ancient and dead civilization before, but never an intact example, the likes of which we found shortly later. Just looking at it, you could feel that it had been a temple or something similar. The bridge we crossed was suspended high above the farmer village we had just emptied, and passing through the door, we were greeted by a giant statue of Auri-El. Serana noted that it appeared to be using emblems of the god's power that were far older than she had seen personally. Anything she says is old, you know, has to be positively ancient. The water we had gathered from the way shrines I poured into a similar basin at the top of a stairway. It drained into 3 channels that, in turn, poured into an indentation in the ground before a massive door. A flash of green light, and the door that had been locked against us was now open. Glad to know we hadn't lugged that water around for nothing. I'd have thought a few days ago that the creepiest place I'd ever visit would be the Soul Cairn, perhaps Castle Volkihar. What we found in the first rooms of the temple, however, made those easy to deal with. Everywhere we looked, we saw Falmer frozen in ice, as though they had just been turned into ice statues while running or trying to fight whatever it was that did this to them. Some held swords or staves, others potions. It was almost like walking through a museum that used mannequins to show events in history, except that the mannequins had once been alive. You could almost feel them staring back. The ewer turned out to have another use, as it opened up a small series of doors that led to a small treasure cache, another frost giant as well. The giant had another of the strange gems, this one of ruby, but there was little else of interest in those first rooms. Apart from trinkets and the like, there was nothing of real interest in the temple, but as we emerged from it on the other side, we reached an entirely new level of creepiness, another room filled entirely with frozen Falmer, almost as if they were at a dance or a ball. At the far end, holding court over his frozen empire, was Archcurate Verthus, Gelabor's brother. He laughed as we entered. A slow and sarcastic clap, the only other sound. He gloated that we had done exactly as he had wished us to, or rather, I had done what he wanted, in bringing Serana to him. From that, I'm going to guess that he has his own version of the prophecy that he wanted to enact. Fortunately, he didn't waste time telling us his master plan. He went straight into trying to kill me, bringing his frozen minions to life. Taking my lord form, I sucked all of the minions dry to replenish my body, leaving Serana to deal with the only other major threat, a rather large frost atronach. It got more than a little dicey a few times. Having your enemy literally bring the roof down on your head can do that. Finally, with no frozen minions left to bring alive again, he started glowing a bright gold. And then the energy he'd gathered burst outward, destroying the room we were in entirely. I was shoved to the ground, but Serana pulled me right back up, pointing to the balcony behind Vertha's throne, and urging me to continue the attack. The fool had mentioned Auri-El's bow, so either he has it, or knows where it is. Perhaps he'll be a bit more forthright about it than Gelabor was, after I've pounded his face in a little bit. You think you understand the world. You think you understand at some level how it works. Then you learn something new. And everything is chaos once again. The Elder Scrolls have always been a source of knowledge, dangerous, but reliably truthful, above manipulation and corruption. Today I learned that this is not, apparently, true. The prophecy was not something the Scrolls created. It was created by a madman. Archcurate Vertha's story is far darker than even mine had been of late. He too was turned into a vampire, by his own initiates no less. as the one with Auri-El's ear, he should have been protected. Instead, the god turned his back on him. Vertha knew he couldn't take revenge on the god directly, but he could remove the most visible and most direct emblem of his power, the sun itself. He created the prophecy to lure in the last piece of the puzzle he needed, for he already had the god's weapon. He just needed the blood of a daughter of Cold Harbor. Which he did lure in, credit where it is due, I suppose. He got Serana, who then tore him apart, lifting him by the throat and tossing him about like a rag doll. I suppose Vertha's blood wasn't as strong as hers. I suddenly wonder how strong mine is, comparatively. The way shrine at the center of the balcony opened as Vertha drew his last breath, and Gelibor stepped from it. We spoke but briefly, I explaining that he hadn't been turned by the betrayed, but that he controlled them as a vampire. He didn't want to believe it at first. But as he thought it through, he saw that I had to be right. Too many things he had seen made far more sense with that piece of information. It also gave him hope that the Falmer might, perhaps, one day give up their hatred and return to their worship of Auri-El. I would advise him not to hold his breath on that one. With his brother now dead, Gelibor granted me possession of Auri-El's bow, which means that we have the power to use it for its original purpose, or to use it for another. The bow has the power, using sun-hallowed arrows, to call down the judgment of the sun. The only way we can do this is for Gelibor to create the needed arrows, as his blood is the only snow elf blood left. Alternately, using Serana's blood, we can do as the prophecy predicted and blot it out entirely. I am still thinking on the usefulness, or not, of either. Serana and I spoke again, and we put into certain words what had to this point been only speculation and worry. We had the bow. We knew how to use it. Lord Harkon was waiting for us to return, and we needed to decide what to do about it. In the end, we both knew that there was only one answer. Anything other than his death would simply just push another confrontation on us, later, always later, and likely at a time and place of his choosing, putting us even more at a disadvantage. We had no choice. We both knew it. When I finally spoke the words, Serana sighed almost, in defeat, but also in relief that I would not try to reconcile with Harkon. We would kill him, and then we would see what happened afterwards.